Hi and welcome to the Mailbox, and straight into the first one. It says, where my family is from, Christmas is actually on January the 7th. Well, happy Christmas then. This is actually the January the 7th. If you're watching this one, I'll put it out there. So, on to actual questions. The first Mailbox of the new year, and one from Twitter here, specifically a question for the Mailbox. It says, are applications a thing of the past? Whilst recently looking for a guild, I see many guilds, mythic quality ones at that, don't have apps, instead opting for Discord interviews or have a chat, run through Mythic Plus and discuss things. Not necessarily a thing of the past. I think all guilds do have an application process, but there is a big advantage to a Discord interview for doing this, and it is probably going to get increasingly more common. If you look at most applications, they tend to have a stock of loads of questions they ask you, most of which are completely irrelevant. Not that the answers aren't really important, although you do sometimes get those as well. But I mean, I remember, like, all I really need for someone to tell me is what their character name is and what realm they're on, because everything else can be done in an interview. Like lots of common applications will ask for example, a link to your Warcraft logs. Well, why? If you know my character name and my realm name, there they are. If you've moved fairly recently, which is not usually the case if you're applying to a new guild, but let's say you have, okay, well, maybe tell me your character name and realm from the previous realm as well. But, with your name and realm, your character name and realm, I can look you up on Warcraft logs. I can look you up on the Armory. I can look up your guild history. I can look up all sorts of things myself. I only need those 2 bits of information. Things that are more like, in terms of how you play your class, that's much better being an interactive process instead of just you spilling your guts. And that's better done in a verbal interview. Also, and especially for Mythic, it's really important for communication that the person can be understood and can understand you. So again, you will get, it's all right on an application saying, do you have a microphone and do you know how to use it? Well, that's fine. But if you do a Discord interview, well, we know that because you'll be talking to us and we'll be talking to you. And if we can understand you and you can understand us, that bodes pretty well for the communication side of things. It also tells us that you are able to communicate. So, yeah, it is a lot better. It is a lot better. And actually doing it, I've never come across the have a chat and run through Mythic Plus to discuss things. That actually sounds like a pretty good idea. I've not actually come across that. Well, I've not done that one myself. Although in the previous guild we did do Discord interviews for preference. Sometimes we still had an application system though, because sometimes you're just a little bit too busy to talk to someone when they contact you. So it is nice to just be able to say to them, well, look, can you do an application? And we'll get back to you the next day. It gives them something positive to do. And it gives you something to look through. And then as a jumping point for some of the questions. Because sometimes when people are talking, you might pick on something they've said and ask them to expand on it. So applications can still be a useful thing. But Discord interviews are way better. I would certainly say they'll probably move towards a process of application followed by Discord interview, if not just completely Discord interview. But there will always be those who do applications. I mean, there's some guilds that still have applications with loads of questions, including things like the /playtime. I don't know why that ever became a thing. I don't know why that was ever of any interest, but it's still asked on some applications. You still get an awful lot of what you might consider irrelevant things being asked. And all that, can... So the fact that people will still ask for things like that don't really matter now, if they ever did, sort of suggests that a lot of people might be slow to move to a new system. But I think you'll increasingly see it. Okay, so onto the YouTube comments. Now, this was... the first ones were about the faction imbalance video I did. It says, first of all, I can't say I agree. As a Horde player, I see that there is more higher-end Horde guilds than Alliance, but there are more Alliance players on both EU and NA than Horde, and even recruiting on Horde at the moment can be difficult. Well, recruiting anywhere can be difficult, but there are not more Horde players, more Alliance players than Horde players. Now, what you're probably looking at is the statistic which shows you how many Alliance characters against how many Horde characters. And sure, if you just look at that, it shows slightly more Alliance characters than Horde characters. However, that includes all the free account characters. It includes all the characters that have never been level to level cap or anything like that. When you filter those out and you just look at level 110s, there are more Horde players than Alliance, Horde characters, sorry, than Alliance characters at that time. We can't really say players. We can never say anything definitive about players because we don't have access to those stats. And it's very difficult even for Blizzard to assert, because there's a certain grey area where some people will play actively on both Horde and Alliance. But I mean, it could be, for example, let's say that Horde players on the whole tend to have more characters than Alliance, then actually a larger number of Horde characters might represent a smaller number of Horde players, for example. So we can only talk in terms of characters. But the point is that when you filter out more and more casual level layers, if you like, then you end up with more and more of an imbalance towards Horde. So, strictly speaking, total number of characters, including, remember, those free-to-play ones that will never have bought a subscription, then slight lead for Alliance. However, level 110s only, slight lead. It is only a slight lead to Horde. Then you filter out those, well, let's say, what is the most basic sort of content you would expect someone to do? Well, heroic dungeons at least. So when you look for some achievements for heroic dungeons, having completed all the types of heroic dungeon, then again, it's a larger proportion of Horde. Then you look at, okay, well, let's do some LFR at least. So someone who's got any sort of raiding achievement, the ones that can also be obtainable from LFR, like completing a wing of a tier, then again, it's a higher number of Horde. And the more, because that's the only way you can really tell about players, it's how, because you've got to remember, you know, characters got nothing to do with subscriptions cost, because you can have like 50 characters. So it is important to try and guess how many players there are, because that's what's important. But all we can do is go, the more investment there is required to be certain types of content done, the more likely we are to be comparing players with players, not just simply characters. And indeed, you do find that the more you strip away that, the more of an imbalance there is towards Horde, until you get right to the top when you're talking about, you know, mythic raiders, people completing mythic content, and indeed there is a huge imbalance in favour of Horde. So there's that one. You have to be a little bit careful with stats. Not that I'm saying mine are perfect, by the way, because mine using the same inferences, the same data that anyone else will be using, because we don't have access to the actual data. Blizzard have that as much as they can themselves. The next comment about it is the thing is whether the problem is a big deal or not. We know for a fact that the new allied race will have racials, meaning that racials aren't going anywhere. Absolutely, I have no doubt at all that racials aren't going anywhere. And at the moment, the main point of the video, I think some people missed this, was that it would make no difference. I mean, I was talking about the fact, you know, it would have been better if racials had no effect on gameplay, if they were there for cosmetic, for flavour. But the fact of the matter is, where we are now makes no difference. If they did get rid of that now, if they change that now, it's too late. It's too late. The imbalance is already there, and it's already so pronounced that that won't actually change anything. So it says, I don't know how big a deal the Void Elf racials actually are, but they look very strong. They are indeed very strong. From what I've seen in a few situations, maybe that could change up some things. Plus, everyone will roll one because elves. There'll be a lot of people want to, but you've got to remember, you know, the class race combinations there. Then it's not a complete free-for-all like it is in some MMOs, which is a good thing, because we don't want gnome paladins. But, yeah, there are racial... The allied races seem to have, if anything, very powerful racials. Like, really useful. Someone was pointing out to me as well that, you know, undead racials are getting a buff as well. Whether that means other ones... I mean, there's plenty of time for other ones to receive buffs as well. But even if they balance it out, it really doesn't matter. I mean, the Horde racials are more powerful at the moment. But even if they do balance it out, it makes no difference, because you've already got such a large proportion there. And as a lot of people were saying in the comments, and this is the point I was trying to make in the video, the number one reason these days for people to be Horde rather than Alliance is simply that there's far more Horde. So if you join a guild and it doesn't work out, then you've got better options for moving somewhere else without affecting too badly your enjoyment of endgame, if it's endgame you want to do. And again, if you join a game, just because of that imbalance, if you join a game with your friends persuade you to join, it's higher likelihood that they're Horde as well. So they'll just end up with new players, just adding to that imbalance, really. Just adding to it and adding to it. The only reason why, as I say, at the very lower end, the end where people aren't even really leveling to level cap, the people who are just sort of trying the game out really, or playing it super casually, maybe in the same way that I do with other MMOs, is those people are probably not playing with friends or anything like that, and therefore it is more likely to be a 50-50 split. And next one, it says, I don't like the idea of playing Horde with Alliance, because what I suggested, just to give some context to this, is like in Elder Scrolls Online, for example, I've always said this as well before even Elder Scrolls Online came out. I don't like it when faction has an effect on PvE. It shouldn't have an effect on PvE. PvP, yes, of course, that's why faction exists at all, for player versus player, but not for PvE. Now, I was suggesting that what they do in Elder Scrolls Online is that faction has no real effect on PvE. You can join guilds with people in opposite factions. You can do dungeons with them. You can do PvE with them. You can't do PvP. You'll be on opposite sides with PvP. But that's fine. That's how it should be. So I was suggesting something similar here. It doesn't really affect the lore because that in the storylines it happens anyway. You have Horde racers working with the Alliance. You have Alliance racers working with the Horde. But so this person, yeah, is saying, I don't like the idea of playing Horde with Alliance. It ruins the story for me. And that is why I play the game for the most part to live in a world of Azeroth. I don't raid or PvP really, so I don't see the big deal. Well, the thing is, I would actually turn that around on its head and say, I don't see the big deal. Because, so you don't like the idea of Horde playing with Alliance. So what content do you do? That you must do the leveling content, you must do the stories. In the stories, we have Horde working with Alliance. Not Horde as in Horde leadership working with the Alliance, but Horde races. We have Orcs working with humans, you know, and Tauren working with Night Elves and things like that, via various other organisations such as the Earthen Ring, Argent Dawn, and so on. So that happens anyway. In the storyline of the game, there are plenty of what would otherwise be Horde characters working with Alliance characters. That happens anyway. So it isn't a change to the lore even. And if you're someone who doesn't like the idea of that, then what I would say is, that's fine. There will be other like-minded people. You join a guild with them and you only allow players with Horde racers or Alliance racers in that guild. I mean, there are guilds I'm sure still exist. I know there were some years ago that would say things like that they would only allow certain races anyway. They were even more restrictive than the normal faction. You know, there are some guilds that, in role-playing guilds, that will only allow certain race class combinations, not just the ones that are allowed in the game. So that's not a problem at all. You can just do that and it doesn't affect everyone else. In fact, I would actually say the very idea of having races linked to faction is inherently racist. You know, the idea that all orcs have to be in the Horde and all humans have to be in the Alliance and so on is inherently racist. And does that actually have a place in modern storytelling? Oh, I'm not so sure. You know, that's a very bad moral to be saying, really. But beyond the moral side of it, as I say, in the game, they work together anyway. So it's still the world of Azeroth. In fact, it's the world of Azeroth to have orcs working with humans. Anyway, on to other things. So, next one. This is about raidy stuff. Doing heroic should lock you out of LFR and doing mythic should lock you out of normal in LFR. Pretty tired of doing the same raid 4 times a week because I might get some insane Titan Forge tier. Well, there you have hit the nail on the head with Titan Forging. That is the very reason, well, it's not the only reason, but it is a big reason why that will never happen. For example, you know, people progressing one mode of raiding sort of rely on the previous ones to try and gear up for it as well. That's just the cycle we're in now. We've moved well away from the time where you just raided a single difficulty. You saw a raid boss die when you killed that raid boss, not when you killed an easier version of it. And that's it. That's where we are now. So we're expected to do, not all of them, but I mean, where am I now at the moment? So I would do a full, I'm progressing through Mythic. Not super quickly, but progressing through Mythic. And I'm still doing all the bosses on Heroic each week, sort of. Actually, I haven't this week. That's because I was expecting to do a heroic run yesterday, which never went ahead. Okay, but generally speaking, I would aim to do heroic each week and do those heroic bosses each week with mythic raiding. If I was a heroic progress raider, I'm sure I'd also be aiming to do normal roads. And if I was just doing normal pugs each week, I'd still expect to do LFR as well. So you expect to do at least 2 modes of raiding. And yes, because of Titan Forge, there can be some incentive to do more. Although I don't think you'd call it pressure to do more. I don't think anyone feels compelled, even very serious raiders, to do 3 of those modes. You might if you have time. In fact, if you're a more serious raider, you're far more likely to just do 2 modes on multiple characters. That tends to be where it is these days, gearing up multiple characters rather than doing lots of modes of the same one. But it's still repeated however you look at it. But yeah, it's not going to go away because Blizzard wants us doing that. It's not that they specifically want us doing that. They want us doing content on a regular basis so that we still stay playing the game. Next one says, what do you think of a ranged class that uses thrown weapons? Haven't had those for a while. Bring in shadow hunters or make a new warrior spec that uses throwing axes or javelins. It would bring in more ranged and give Blizzard an interesting aesthetic class fantasy to mess around with. Warrior just popped into mind since they are strength class and you need a lot of strength realistically in order to throw axes for an extended period of time. Well, if we're going to split hairs about it, you'd need endurance for that. Strength is to throw them hard. But the idea, I mean, see, first of all, my instant idea is I don't want any more classes at all. If there are more classes, they obviously have to be ranged. I keep saying this. It's an absolute madness, and I don't understand why this has happened. That there have been 3 new classes brought into the game since vanilla. And they've all been melee. And not only have they all been melee, they've all been exclusively melee. There are no ranged options for any of them. And I think there could have been ranged options for all of them. You know, Death Knight, when I first saw it, before we found any details, before the beta went out and everything like that, I thought it was going to have a ranged option because I saw some gameplay of it, chucking down Death and Decay and sending ghouls off, and I thought there was going to be a ranged spec to it. That didn't turn out to be the case. You know, Monks, Demon Hunters both could have had a ranged spec, and neither did. So if there is going to be a new class, it must be ranged. It absolutely must be ranged. And it must be exclusively ranged. I don't even know what Blizzard were thinking of giving Well, I know what they were thinking of giving Hunters a melee option. They were thinking, we want to make all the specs of Hunter very different. And there used to be melee capabilities of Hunters when the game first came out. I know that's what they were thinking. But it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And yeah, but the idea that you introduce ranged specs to already existing melee classes has interest. So I don't know how interesting you could make a spec. I suppose it might be possible. A warrior ranged spec that chucked things. If that, you know, if they can come up with a system for dealing with that, that actually sounds like it might be okay. I'm not sure how warrior players would feel about that. The idea of standing back and chucking things from a distance. I'm not sure it quite sits right. I've often said that, you know, I could absolutely see paladins having a range spec. You know, an official Shockadin spec. I'd be absolutely fine with that. You know, the idea of, yeah, having dedicated melee classes that have ranged options to them. Yeah. That I can see as a way of improving the balance between ranged and melee in raids, especially. Next one, it says, is it important to sim if you only run up to normal? At this level, isn't Ask Mr. Robot sufficient and so much faster and easier? Yes, of course. When it comes to simming, I know that the answer is always, for anyone who's interested, you know, how do I know what's better pieces of gear or what's better talents, stuff like that? The answer ultimately has to come across in terms of simming it, because it is very complicated and there's no cookie cutter for everyone necessarily. But of course, if you're not doing super challenging content, it's not very important to maximize. Simming specifically is for people who want to maximize their performance. So if you're doing normal runs, whether it's in a pug or in a guild, and you feel comfortable with the content, you're not in any danger of losing your spot, and your raid as a whole is not in danger of wiping lots of times, or preferably ever, then of course, yes, there is no need for you to maximize as such. And if it's a hassle to sim, then you absolutely don't need to do it. Simming really is for those who do want to maximize it, let's say you know, every now and then there's like a 0.5% wipe or something. Well, you know, if only I could have sneaked out a bit of extra damage. Something like that is, or a bit of extra healing if you're a healer, if a couple of people are just dying but they're not dying by much. Those sorts of things are for what you want to sim for. But yeah, if you're just doing fairly unchallenging content for yourself, then no, you don't need to. You don't need to. We shouldn't feel that everyone should need to sim. It all very much depends on, like I said, how much you want to maximize. Like, for example, I was, you know, when I was streaming yesterday, I was leveling up my shaman. When I was getting gear upgrades, if it was an item level upgrade, assuming it wasn't in an heirloom slot, I was just equipping it. I wasn't going on to, like, you know, Simcraft or anything like that going, oh, it's a 5 item level upgrade, but it's different stats. Is it actually an upgrade? I'd better check. No, I was just equipping it. And that's all you need to do if you're going to do something fairly low level. Next question, it says, could a guild realistically be run like a cooperative where all decisions are managed democratically or via a group of elected representatives or a mix of the two? Would you join one if you had the opportunity and needed the guild? I have come across a guild, not been in a guild, but come across a guild on my original realm that advertised itself as just such a thing. Now, I knew a few people in it, but I didn't really ask them questions about how it worked in practice. All I would say is, there isn't always a hierarchy in life anyway. There isn't always a hierarchy in a guild, even when there's a normal structure. Like most guilds have the structure of, you know, guild leader and officers. And it might well be that the guild leader doesn't have authority over the officers anyway. Some do, some don't. Depends how it works out. Some guilds tend to make decisions democratically anyway. Officers tend, and sometimes in those guilds, officers really are there to carry out administrative roles. They will, yes, okay, they will decide on important issues where there's no consensus in the guild, and they might decide on who to accept for trial and who not to. So you do get some guilds that are a bit of a mixture of how democratic they can be anyway, but there will always be in any system some people who are more influential than others. Whether just because they're more charismatic or for whatever reason, there will always be some people whose word and opinion carries more weight. And in a system where there's no rigid hierarchical structure, those people will actually effectively have even more influence because there's no checks on them. Because they will persuade other people of their point of view or just bully other people into following it, and there's no actual check in there to stop them. So I actually don't like the concept of it, not having experienced it and only having come across or having heard of one guild that does it. I'm sure there are others, but I've only actually heard of one. But yeah, the idea to me doesn't appeal, because in any guild, regardless of the structure, as I say, you always have those who are more influential anyway. And which sometimes is a good thing, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes they're more influential because they tend to be seen as wiser, and rightly so. Sometimes not. Sometimes they're just more charismatic or cunning or sly, whatever you want to say. So personally, no. But I think in reality, most guilds, even with a structure, do tend to have a democratic element to it. Because I think it's a foolish leadership that doesn't ask for people's points of view. And last one. I'm scared as a Windwalker monk of how dramatic a gameplay change losing my artifact weapon will be. The artifact ability for Windwalker is basically a core rotational damage ability on a relatively short cooldown. It also allows for good self-healing via Transcendence, Transference. Okay. Yeah, I think, you know, this is one of those things. I mean, Blizzard, even the class developers are not stupid people. I occasionally think they do stupid things, but they're not stupid people. I don't... If there's any artifact abilities that are very genuinely a core feature of the gameplay, I have little doubt that they would be baked into baseline. There will certainly be a significant rebalancing of abilities and styles, I think, where something has to be lost. When it comes to the main artifact ability, I think that's quite straightforward. I think where Blizzard see it as a crucial part of the rotation, I think they'll just bake it in. The wider implications will come in the fact that artifact weapons don't just confer upon us one ability. There's usually about half a dozen. If you look at it, if you look at your weapon, only so many of them those traits are buffing the damage or healing done by certain abilities. There are several that just give you straight up a new ability. And it's the loss of some of those, which are almost certain to be lost, which might have little subtle effects that are not so easy to appreciate at the moment. But yeah, I think Blizzard, then they said themselves, obviously they know there's some specs they're going to have to do some work on for Battle for Azeroth. They're obviously going to have to do work on all of them. I mean, there is, remember, a class design team. That team is not going to sit up with its feet up going, do you know what, we did all our work in Legion, we're going to have a bit of a rest in BFA. No, they're still hard at work. They've still got those same people in it. And, well, minus Celestial on now, I suppose. I don't know whether there's going to be a replacement. But they're still going to be hard at work. They're still going to be able to redesign. It's just that they're going to spend more time on redesigning the ones that either haven't worked in Legion or that are going to, like Windwalkers, as you say, going to suffer with the loss of the artifact weapons if something isn't done instead. So, you know, I wouldn't worry too much at the moment. Beyond the fact that Windwalkers should always worry, just like Wretch should always worry, you should always worry when you've only got one DPS spec. Because if that one gets ballsed up, you haven't got a fallback. So that's the only thing I would worry about. Not the loss of the artifact ability. I would guess that they'll just bake some of them baseline. I think that just makes the most sense. It's a lot easier to do that than it is to piss about coming up with a whole new system, when if you've got a system that already works well enough, just make it baseline. That's my view anyway. So there we go. That's this week's mailbox. I'll keep checking comments and answering these each week. If this is the first time here, don't forget to subscribe if you want to watch more of these. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and share with other people who might be interested. And thanks for coming. And until next time, I'll see you later.